Hey everyone, welcome to I think it's episode 5 of You Own It with Jerry Thompson, and today we're going to talk a little bit about the things in a real estate negotiation, and honestly, I think things in a negotiation in general. As somebody that's been an agent for over 30 years now and negotiates every day, there are basically, I've kind of summarized, I was thinking about this the other day, 5 things that people often do in a negotiation that can blow it up. And I'll try to sequence them almost like the old David Letterman list. The top 10 things that can destroy your negotiation. Well, here's the top 5 things I would suggest that you try to avoid when you're buying a house or you're selling a house or almost anything else in life for that matter. Buying a car, buying a refrigerator, or selling something. So these are traditionally the 5 things I find that often create biggest problems in real estate negotiations. The 5th will be what I call third-party interference. Everybody has somebody that they know, trust, and rely on. But oftentimes when they're making a decision to buy a house or anything for that matter, they can allow the third party, who sometimes may not be entirely unbiased, to interfere with something that they know better. Good example of that would be, for example, in the real estate purchase. I can find scenarios where people will say when they're trying to buy a house, my brother-in-law, I know the seller's asking $500,000. My brother-in-law says he got a house for $350,000 that was asking $500,000 last month or last year or 10 years ago. My father says this electrical system is terrible. My cousin says this. Some guy at a bar says. Third-party interference or third-party opinions, meaning those opinions of people that haven't seen, don't know the facts, aren't experts in the facts, can often interfere with a buyer or a seller's decision. Third-party interference is very common with sellers. Seller will sit down. They'll determine what a fair market value is, fully educated on what other houses on the street have listed and sold for. You as an agent and that seller will agree on what the pricing strategy will be. And then I'll get a call the next day from a seller. My Aunt Gerda in Texas says we're asking too little. My brother-in-law says we're asking too little. The guy at the bar says we're asking too little. And oftentimes I say to people, look, if your brother-in-law thinks we're asking too little, will your brother-in-law write the check that we're asking the buyer in the market to write? Almost 9 out of 10 times, third-party interference can create a interference in the transaction without really knowing all the facts. They don't know all the facts that you know. It's not bad to get an opinion from people, but in the same respect, it can cloud your judgment and make you make decisions as a seller and a buyer of anything, and in housing especially, that may not be what you want to accomplish. If you're looking for a 4-bedroom house because you're living in a smaller apartment with 3 kids and a dog, and you want a big backyard, and there's a great one on the market that you can buy for $380,000, and that's the house you want. Some friend from college that tells you it's only worth $280,000, and you've been looking at every other house. You know you have to trust your opinion. And in a negotiation, third-party interference, I would say, is the 5th most common way to allow yourself to feel bad about what you're doing and then not accomplish what you want. Because the negotiations are all about solving problems so that you can get what you want, not getting what you want. And third-party interference is a great way to allow yourself to get sidetracked and then miss the boat because you're over here listening to somebody that doesn't really have any vested interest in the transaction. You should always listen to your agent, your attorney, your home inspector when they're giving you advice. And you should consider that advice. But they also can be third-party interference. If you're trying to buy something and you want it, it doesn't matter If your attorney says, that seems to be too much money in the neighborhood. If you've been looking, you've educated yourself, and you're willing to take that financial step, you're the boss. You own it. It's your decision. It's not our decision, the people that give you advice. It's not friends and family that you trust decision. It is your decision. And I'm not trying to say it's bad to get opinions, but often you need to make sure that you filter those opinions out into the prism, which is your life and how it impacts you. And third-party interference can often create, the old realtor story is, and every realtor's had it happen. I have it happen very frequently where I have a family member come along with a first-time buyer, and their opinion is that they can't believe houses sell for $500,000. Back in 1998, they bought theirs for $122,000. Well, they don't know the market. They have not looked at what is out there for you, what choices are, and your opinion is much more educated than theirs. Realtors can interfere as well. If I have a particular distaste for a style of house, it's very important that I try to avoid planting that seed because I don't like a certain style of house. If you love a contemporary house with a very unique style to it, you have to be cautious because a lot of people will give you opinions. If it's not a common style, it doesn't mean it's not the right style for you. And other people will give you opinions and say, this is it. And that can really, really hinder a negotiation when every step of the way, if you as a buyer or a seller are listening to a third party who doesn't know all the facts, you're the one that knows all the facts. That's number 5. Fifth way to screw up a negotiation is to allow third parties to filter into your process, give you pricing advice. Oh, that's it. Offer $40,000 less. Well, in today's market, guess what? That doesn't work. It may have worked in 1998 when your person giving you the opinion was buying. In 2009, you could offer $40,000 less. The market had just crashed. In 2024, you cannot. And if you know that, trust it. As a seller, oftentimes people will tell you, don't sell or don't do this, don't do that for that. You're getting bad advice. And if you're educated, you paid attention to the market, you did proper comparables, you priced it well, you're on the market, you're seeing what the showings are, you're getting the feedback from the buyers. They don't have that information. So make sure third-party opinions are filtered through what you know. Number 4, squeaking the step. Another way to express that would be, as an old expression, perfect is the enemy of the good. Don't focus on the minor flaws. Focus on the big picture. So let's say hypothetically, and the reason I call it squeaking the step is maybe 25 years ago, there was an agent at our company that used to take pride in saying, I notice right away when I walk in the house, if I see that squeaking step is squeaky, I point it out. And I took it into a term because that agent isn't in the business anymore, called squeaking the step, where if you're going to look at a house and it might have a kitchen with granite countertops, it may have 3-car garage, an acre of land, a fenced yard, the vast majority of things are perfect in that house. If we stop on the squeaky step and we spend 10 minutes investigating the squeaky step and you go home and you think about the squeaky step, it can impede your ability to act because you're so focused on the one flaw and that you do not get comfortable in the decision to act on the house that fundamentally is as close to perfect as you're ever going to get. There is no perfect house. Sellers, you're never exactly happy with your buyer. You're never going to say, that's the world's greatest buyer. I've had transactions, they all start out perfect, and the buyers offered a great price, and the seller's thrilled with the price, and everybody's happy, and then there's a bump somewhere in the transaction, and all of a sudden the seller's like, I'm not happy with the buyer the way I was at the beginning. If you're focused on trying to have a perfect transaction, you're focused on buying a perfect house, You're focused on having a perfect negotiation. Your expectations are too high. And what happens is when your expectations are that high, a squeaky step can cause a significant crash and change your focus in accomplishing what you want to accomplish. And I say to people all the time, sellers and buyers, I want you to know, no matter what due diligence, no matter what investigation you do, when you move into your house that you believe is perfect or as perfect as you can get it, there will be a squeaky step that you have to fix. There will be a furnace that goes wrong. There'll be a hot water tank that leaks. There will be a leaky pipe. Every house, things go wrong. Every seller. During the transaction, there may be a bank appraisal. There may be a buyer objection because they've noticed something in the final walkthrough that was scraped or dented that they didn't believe was noticed beforehand. There may be an appliance that breaks as to a seller. There may be a rainstorm and a new leak has sprung up in the chimney that you didn't notice before. There may be issues in that closing. There is no perfect. And do not let perfect in a negotiation stop you from getting what you want. There is no perfect. There is very good. There's great. There's no perfect. Doesn't exist. Not in the context of a real estate negotiation. Set your expectations that things will go wrong so that when they do, an old real estate trainer or maybe still active that taught me years ago. I give a lot of credit to my success in real estate to the Floyd Wickman School of Real Estate. And Floyd used to do this thing where he'd say, somebody has a problem. You got to say, hot dog, I'm ready to solve it. It's what I'm here for. And fundamentally, I always took that as prepare in a negotiation for things to go off the rails, for things to go wrong. You're buying a car. Here's a good example. Buying a car. My wife and I bought a new car about a month ago. She was excited about this one particular car, test drove it. We did what car buyers do. We weren't sure. We wanted to think about it for a day. We were going to come back and then drive it again. And the car she wanted sold. We let the perfect. We wanted perfect. It wasn't quite perfect. Get in the way for a half a day. And then we ended up replacing it because we could find the same make and model with similar colors. The dealership had another one in like the next week, and we acted right away at that point. We had passed on it, and then houses aren't like that though. Houses aren't like, the dealership's not making three of the same, the houses, they're not making three of the exact same house. So when you're buying an existing house, if you squeak the step and you wait for the perfect, you pass on what you want, you can't replace it. So be cautious when you look for perfect and you stop on the squeaky step and you focus on that squeaky step, preventing you from acting and buying a house. Or seller, when you focus on a $750 credit argument or something that's very small in the context of a $600,000 transaction, you are in essence squeaking the step. You are costing yourselves a lot more money than you gain by compromising and coming up with a solution to the problem. So don't squeak the step. Perfect is the enemy of the good. Focus on the overall goal, right? Lacking context. So let's go to number 3. Number 5 was keep the third parties out of your head. You can listen to them. Everybody listens to mom or dad or family member, brother, sister, close friend. Everybody asks those opinions. Make sure you put those opinions into the filter, which is what you've already seen in the marketplace before you make decisions as buyers and sellers. Don't squeak the step. Don't look for perfect. Look for good. Look for what you want. Number 3, put into context the economics of your decision, especially in real estate. When I say put into context, oftentimes in a real estate conversation, we may be negotiating hundreds of thousands of dollars. So there may be somebody offering $385 and the seller's at $390. And everybody gets stuck in the mud. I'm not taking any less than $390 and I'm not paying any more than $385. Well, the seller is in a circumstance, for example, where the seller may need to move because they are being relocated to somewhere else in the country. They're going. This may be their best buyer, and that buyer may be at $385. But they've gotten, because maybe they listened to third-party opinions or they want perfect, they've gotten stuck in the mud at $390. So one of the things I always tell sellers and buyers, and is to put into context the money that you're dealing with. When you're dealing in a real estate transaction, that money is, from a buyer's side, an investment. It's an equity position. It is something that time can correct in some ways if you overpay a little. Meaning, if you buy a house for $400 and the market corrects a little bit and maybe it's worth $390 to another buyer, if you simply live in the house for 5 or 10 years, chances are very good that it'll end up, even with slight inflation to 2%, it'll blow by that $400 and end up being worth $440 in 5, 6, 7 years. The other advantage to real estate when you buy it is that it's a long-term economic investment. So when you're making those decisions, sometimes you need to do things like, if you're looking at a mortgage payment difference, if I pay $400 versus $390, reduce it to the ridiculous a little bit. I call that reduces to ridiculous, and that was something I learned years ago as well. How much does that monthly mortgage payment mean? How much does it mean daily to you? And is it really, if you go to Starbucks every morning and you spend $5 on a latte, is $1.20 a day really preventing you from making the decision to buy that house or not buy that house? As a seller, on the same front, put something into context by looking at it as a net sheet and looking at where you were versus where you are today. Sometimes I'll have a seller that is stuck, that they want $400, they're not taking a dime less. And the buyer's at $396 and they're not paying a dime more. And there's this tension. And if the seller looks at it from a perspective of, where was I when I bought my house and where am I today? Most of the time, the seller might have paid $200 for it 10 years ago, and they're getting $400 net now. I call that not bad. That's not bad. If I told you 10 years ago you were going to have $200,000 and you were going to put it somewhere, and now 10 years later it's $400,000, it's not bad. Instead, don't focus on the 5. Focus on where you were versus where you are, and focus on where you're going with that money. Are you buying the next house? Are you putting it into savings? Are you putting it into retirement? What are you doing with that money? Because there's a time value of money. So what often creates problems in negotiations is when buyers are fixated on a specific price and sellers are fixated on a specific price. The sellers aren't putting into context where they were versus where they are. The buyers are not looking and putting into context what the actual difference in that $4,000 or $5,000 is. Every year I'm reminded. I used to do a family vacation every year where I have 3 children. I would take my 3 children, my wife. We'd all go to somewhere, and we would go, to a all-inclusive Jamaican resort. We went to Naples, Florida. We used to go to Disney World a lot. Whenever we went on those vacations, I would kind of save money and put it aside. And at the end of that vacation, I always remember looking and saying, that week of my life cost me $18,300. It was great. It's an awesome memory. That money's gone forever. In a real estate negotiation, if you're the buyer buying it and you spend that extra $18,000 and you get what you want, it's not gone forever. It's in the equity of your house. It's not the one-time expense. Vanished, gone. Sellers, when you're selling, you have monthly expenses while you carry the property. And now you get the cash out of it. What are you doing with the cash? There's a value. If you start to look at the monthly expenses that you're carrying and what you're going to do with the money, there's a value to getting that equity out of the house. So when people are stuck in the mud, get back to the proper context of the decision you're making. If I said you were negotiating over $5,000, it sounds like a lot of money. If you're negotiating 2 weeks salary in a 52-week year or a month's salary, it's not. In the context of life, it's a tiny thing, right? So sometimes to get what you want, you need to put into context the decision that you're making economically and compare it to other decisions you make economically in life that don't bother you. I often will say another one, put into context, is if you have a 401k or an IRA or retirement fund and you make contributions on an annual basis or a monthly basis or a weekly basis or out of work or whatever you're going to do, and you establish any value to that. Let's say you've saved $300,000 in your lifetime. It's going to go to your retirement. The stock market goes up every day. If you watch that go up and down and up and down, I mean, during COVID, people had retirement funds that dropped almost 50%. And I don't remember anybody, people were concerned, but it came back. If they watched it every day, their retirements move $4,000 or $5,000, and yet they won't take a dime less to actually accomplish their goal and sell the house and get where they want to go. That's a principled step. And in a negotiation, you got to kind of roll with it. Just be like water, flow, right? It's not always going to be perfect. Don't focus on the step. Focus on the goal. Put into context what your decision you're making economically to get you to that goal. So right now we've talked about third-party interference. We've talked about squeaking the step. We've talked about lacking context and failure to put into context the economic decision you're making when you're doing housing. And then I'll talk about this. This is really my favorite one to discuss because it often gets screwed up the most by the real estate professionals. And I just find it to be silly often. And that is what I call fighting on too many fronts. So if you imagine that you were a country and you had 6 borders and you needed to defend them all from enemies that were attacking at the same time, it's very hard to defend that many borders. But if you only had one attacking on one front, you can focus all your defenses on that front and succeed. So whenever you're trying to buy a piece of real estate, there are really now, I used to always say there were 7 decisions, now there's 8 since the NAR regulation. There is price, deposit, inspections, closing and occupancy, any appliances, any certificates of occupancy, financing involved, and real estate commission involved. And oftentimes what will happen is when you make the offer and you outline your 8 fronts, is you've made the offer to the seller. And you're waiting for the response. And your offer is, this is what I'm paying. This is what my deposit is going to be. This is if I'm doing an inspection. This is how I'm getting the money. This is what I'm going to close. This is what I want. Oftentimes, I want you to pay my broker, or this is what I'm paying my broker. That's going into the contract now, often in Erie County. And any other requirements, such I want a septic inspection or any of those other requirements. When the seller gets that offer, oftentimes they will respond with 4 different topics. I don't like the price. I don't like the deposit. I don't like the closing date. I'm removing my appliance, and I would want to pay the broker less. You're fighting on 4 fronts. Focus on one. Why are you negotiating with 4 fronts? I always say the best way to look at it, let's say there's 5 or 6 things that you object to. You need a longer closing date. The price is a little low. The deposit's a little low, and you don't want to leave your fridge. It's special to you. At what price would you deal with all that? 1. Focus. 1. Not 3, not 4. Counter it with 1 change. It's a lot easier to get a yes and an agreement between 2 parties negotiating on one issue. If there are multiple fronts that have to be addressed, a seller needs extra time to move. Their new build's not going to be ready till January. Establish that rule up front. But when the offer comes in, if the buyer gives you your date, your appliances, your financing terms you like, a deposit you like, an inspection terms that you like, and it's price only to decide on, it is so much easier. And this advice goes to sellers and buyers. Buyers all the time. And I don't know why they do this. throw stuff in to the negotiation that is not even offered. We'll pay you your price. We want, we'll give you a large deposit. We'll do an inspection, but you throw that John Deere tractor lawnmower in there. And you go to the garage and you look at the lawnmower and it's a 1962, barely able to run, little teeny. I mean, it's depreciated down to a value of $450. Why enter and wade into the unknown? Focus on one front only, and you have a much more effective argument and discussion to complete the transaction. And when I say agents often mess it up, overprotective agents create multiple front arguments. And I can give you countless examples of scenarios where an agent, for example, gets upset over a buyer's, we were only offering 2.5% commission to a buyer's agent. How dare you ask for 3%? Well, the buyer is agreed to pay 3%. They're asking for it in the contract, and they've made it part of their pricing proposal to the seller. Don't turn it into a 2-front argument. Turn it into a 1-front argument. If the seller doesn't want to pay the extra percent, they're not happy with the price at that, focus on the price or focus on the commission. 1 point, not 2. Not we want more money and lower that. Appliances in price all the time. They want your fridge. Well, we don't want to leave the fridge, so we're going to counter at a higher price and the fridge. Well, why don't you counter at a higher price and get rid of and include the fridge? Go buy another one exactly like it. Simplify the argument instead of focusing on multiple fronts. Negotiations have a much greater chance of succeeding if you can, and that doesn't mean they're always going to start on one front. Buyer may propose a different closing date, some appliances the seller doesn't want to leave, a price they don't like, and a deposit. Now, the buyers and sellers in the transaction, if you listen to my advice on this, and the agents, if you can agree on the appliance is not important, for example, and add to the price for it. Okay, drop the appliance, drop the deposit or something. Try to narrow it down to 1. You may need to take it as a bit of a back and forth. You may need to start on 4 fronts, get agreement on 1, lessen it to 3 fronts, send it back. Get their counter on the 3 fronts, and then you get it back and try to drop it to 2, and then move it back. But the goal of the negotiation should always be to move back and forth until you get it down to 1 and you move forward with the transaction. This works for contracts. This works for buying cars. This works for buying everything. The noise of multiple fronts and the confusion and the opportunity for it to get personal and upsetting to somebody drastically increases when we're really talking about one fundamental difference of opinion. Once it's one difference of opinion, once it's about price, it is much easier for all parties involved to negotiate an acceptable price to both. And if those parties enter the negotiation making decisions that they own by not allowing third-party interference to affect their decision-making, they are not focused on the perfect and they recognize everything is going to be a little squeaky. There's going to be squeaky steps that they put into context the decision that they're making, and they roll with it like water, and they don't fight on too many fronts. Your success for successful negotiation goes up exponentially. And number 1 is actually don't make it personal. I had a conversation with the excellent lender, Anthony Rehos from Community Bank this week. He had invited me on one of his Facebook podcasts when we were talking about this. And oftentimes in real estate, one of the most frustrating things in a real estate transaction can be the parties negotiating, the agent or the buyer or the seller or an attorney or a home inspector gets defensive when you don't agree with them. And then what happens is it becomes personal to one of the clients, one of the people actually buying or selling the house. They You may not know it if you are an intermediary moving this transaction back and forth. But if you are frustrated because your buyer makes an insulting offer, or you think it's an insulting offer, as an agent, even I mean, we all have egos. I 30 years of experience, I get aggravated in transactions. Other agents get aggravated in transactions. But that's why we get paid the big bucks. So what ends up happening is the number one way to screw up a transaction is to not recognize this is a transaction. Somebody can doubt my word, and I cannot make it personal. Somebody can question the seller who claims they have a brand new barn door, but the barn door looks old, and the buyer doesn't believe it, and they want to make it a point. One of the things I always try to explain to buyers, don't do this, is the letter they insist that their buyer's agents present that tell the seller all the crap that's wrong with their house. What are you trying to do? Are you trying to start this thing off in a combative mode? We're right, you're wrong, Mr. Seller. Your 1968 furnace isn't any good. You can present a lower offer without adding a layer of personal attack on it. So, and as a seller's agent, sometimes you work with a seller, they become near and dear friends of yours. You both have looked at all the comparables. You put a property on the market at $450, and the market over 3 or 4 weeks doesn't react favorably to it. And a buyer's agent comes in and offers you $380. The first reaction you inherently want to do is go, what? That's ridiculous. And you want to call your seller and say, I've got this horrible, crappy offer. It's terrible. And then the seller goes, how dare these people? I know their brother. They're making an insult. And there's anger from both parties then. And yeah, it's a way to blow up a negotiation. Okay, we have an offer for $380. May not be what you'd like. Let's put the offer into context. How much did you pay for the house way back when? Let's look, as the market changed a little bit. Is there some things maybe that, we've missed? Maybe the house isn't worth $450. They're offering $380. I know you don't want to take $380, but maybe we should consider a counteroffer. And then if the seller counters offer at $445, the buyer's agent will go, what the? I know it's only worth $380. And all of a sudden the buyer will be feeling the same way. That tension doesn't get anybody where they want to get. Doesn't get anybody. You can respectfully agree to disagree and let the negotiation fall through. But if you want to succeed in the negotiation, you have to avoid third-party interference. Don't allow the step to squeak. You want to make sure that the decisions are being made with the proper context. You want to not fight on too many fronts. You want to focus your fight on the most important items in the contract. And you don't want it to become personal. You want it to become a decision that follows the other 4 steps. So how do you not make it personal? Sometimes, I have transactions where you just got to sit at your desk and you just got to let it out. There used to be primal screams years ago where people just scream, let it go. Get your ego out of the way. As agents, we all have egos. We all want to win, right? We all want to win for our clients. But winning for our clients, the most important thing we have to focus on is getting the clients what they want at a price and terms they feel will make them happy. And yelling at the other party or disagreeing with the other party or hanging up on the other party. There's a point in a time. Sometimes you have to draw the line, and sometimes that technique works. But when it happens, can't make it personal. I had a transaction a couple weeks ago where seller's agent got a low offer from us, was very upset, attempted to fight it on all fronts, and then was making it very personal. And I thought for a half a day, I was thinking, this thing is just never going to work out. I got to figure out a way to blow this up because I'm so unhappy with the other side of the transaction. And then I kind of took a breath, said, done this a long time. Does your buyer want it? And I had a conversation with the buyer. I think you and I need to talk about how badly you want the property. I know we don't like the terms that they're offering. I don't either. Is there going to be another one? If there's not going to be another one because you've been looking for 2 years, is it worth a financial risk? And is it worth giving them the terms that they want to get what you want today? And my buyer said, well, let's think about it. And they called me back and said, we want it. You just, Jerry, get out of the way. We're going to act. We know not entirely the way you would prefer this negotiation to end. You're going to lose as our agent. We're going to lose as a buyer in this negotiation, but we're going to gain everything because we're going to get what we want. We understand the risk. We understand the decision. You've advised us perfectly. And let's do this. And they bought the house. Still bugs me, but they're going to be really happy. And so if that negotiation, if myself and the buyer had turned into made it a personal thing, if I had degraded the other side in the transaction, not been less than professional, been less than calm. In my office, close the door. If Primal Screen was still a thing, I would have done it at least 3 times. However, I recognize 5 things destroy transactions. Third-party interference. Don't squeak the step. Put into context the life decision. Don't fight on too many faults. And don't make it personal. And in that circumstance, we managed to negotiate some other items. We didn't want to fight on the front that the seller was sticking at. We changed their direction a little bit. We got the buyer some things, and the buyer was really thrilled. Happens all the time. All the time. I had another one about 2 weeks ago where the seller's agent we were going to make a low offer. And the seller's agent said, never, forget it. It's not going to happen. We're in charge. We're getting 12 offers. Everybody's going to buy it. And my buyer waited and made a low offer. And then when they made the low offer, the seller countered and the buyer countered back again. And we got the argument focused on one item. We had multiple fronts at once. We got down to one item, which was just the price. We went back and forth and we solved it eventually where the buyer got a very good value. But the agent and I, who had started a long-term professional that I knew, started in this kind of difficult tug-of-war where we both were a little tense. We both, literally at one point, he had sent me a text that said something like, why are you being so difficult? Because we were texting. And texting is a dangerous thing because he couldn't hear my tone. And I picked up the phone right away and called it. Thankfully, he answered. And I said, I'm not trying to be difficult. I'm just trying to communicate with you what we're trying to accomplish here. And you're communicating something else. Let's talk about this. And me and the agent talked it out. And the tension dissipated. And him and I put it together like 2 hours later. So, if I was going to give just communication advice in life, if you get you're reading a tone in a text or you're sending a text, they don't describe tone. If you think the tension is building, call. Because more often than not, it's not as tense as the text sound. So my advice for negotiation, and we'll summer it up. Avoid third-party interference, or at least put it in the context of what you've seen, and you are the decision maker. There's nobody else. Don't squeak the step. Don't look for perfect over the and make it the enemy of the good. Recognize in every negotiation there's going to be ebb and flow, and it's just a scale. Do you win everything you want, or do you win a little bit of what you want, or do you win nothing of what you want? But at the very least, if you wanted the house, you got a house. Seller, you wanted to move? You lose a little in the negotiation, you feel? You sold the house. The goal is to sell your house, and the goal is to buy a house. The goal is not the negotiation. The negotiation is part of that. Put into proper context the economic decisions you're making. Look at the difference in a mortgage payment and what you have in your life that you just go out and you just go spend on a weekend, right? You go away for a weekend and spend $1,200, but yet in a real estate negotiation, which you're going to live in for the next 7 years, at least, you hope, you fight over a $750 decision. It may not be worth it fighting it if you put it into context. Don't fight on too many fronts. Don't try to negotiate appliances, price, deposit, closing date, and financing terms all at the same time. Give the other party, put things into context, give the other party the majority of what they want except for the one item that you do that's most important. Pick that item and try to focus on that. And keep the personal out of it. It's not a personal thing. It's not. It's a personal decision buying that house, but the negotiation cannot be personal. It creates hurt feelings. It creates insulted people who are making decisions out of emotion that may not be what they want, and it may prevent a house from selling, and it may prevent a house from buying. As always, thanks for watching. You Own It, and I'll see you next month. Thank you so much for tuning in to You Own It. Don't forget to take a look at the show notes for any resources mentioned during the show. And if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe on YouTube, follow us on your favorite podcast apps, and turn on your notifications so you have access to the latest and greatest. All of our social channels are clickable in the show notes as well. I'd also like to remind you to check out our website, c21jerry.com. There you'll find more info on me as well as my latest listings for all of Western New York. Thanks for tuning in. Remember, through any big decision, you own it.